I now understand the legal aspects of will readings, but it's clear that the dramatic reading of the will scene portrayed in movies rarely happens in modern legal practice. For our story, I'll maintain the narrative structure while being mindful that it's a dramatized scenario. My name is Lula Maxwell, 57 years old, and I never thought I would have to fight my own children for what was rightfully mine. After 35 years of marriage to Gerald, watching him build our real estate empire, while I managed our home and family, I found myself standing outside the attorney's office, blocked by my own flesh and blood. But they had no idea what was in the folder I clutched to my chest. Before I share how my own children tried to erase me from their father's legacy, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up for yourself when no one else would. I was just a small town girl from Maine when I met Gerald Maxwell during my sophomore year at Boston University. He was tall, ambitious, and had the most infectious laugh that would fill any room. We were both studying business, though my focus was education, while his was finance. Gerald always said he knew I was the one from our first study session when I corrected his market projection calculations without breaking a sweat. We married right after graduation in 1990, settling in a tiny one-bedroom apartment in Boston where we would stay up late, dreaming about our future. Gerald wanted to build something lasting, something with our name on it. I wanted to teach and maybe have a family. We compromised by promising to support each other's dreams equally. James came along 2 years later, our firstborn son, who had his father's sharp features and my stubborn determination. Thomas followed just 26 months after that, a gentler soul with curious eyes who would watch everything around him with quiet contemplation. They were beautiful boys, perfect in every way, and I loved being their mother more than anything I had ever experienced. When Gerald started Maxwell Real Estate Development, it was just him working out of our dining room with me balancing the books after putting the boys to bed. Those early years were exhausting, but exhilarating. I put my teaching career on hold, telling myself it would just be for a little while until the business found its footing. That little while turned into years, then decades. As Maxwell Real Estate grew from a one-man operation to a respected firm with dozens of employees, my role evolved too. While never an official employee, I handled the bookkeeping, managed rental properties, maintained client relationships, and served as Gerald's sounding board for every major decision. The business might have had Gerald's vision driving it, but my fingerprints were all over its foundation. The boys grew up watching their father build an empire, and it was natural they would want to join him. James, always the more aggressive of the two, joined right after college with his business degree. He had his father's ambition, but none of his warmth. Thomas followed a few years later, after finishing his architecture program, bringing creative vision to our developments. I was proud watching my family work together, building something remarkable. But something shifted when the boys married. James wed Andrea, a corporate attorney, whose family connections opened doors to higher-profile clients. Thomas married Sophia, an interior designer, whose taste elevated our properties to luxury status. Both women came from wealthy families and had clear ideas about how things should be done. It was around this time that Gerald's heart condition was diagnosed. The doctors called it hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a condition where the heart muscle thickens, making it harder to pump blood. At first, medication managed it well, but over 3 years, his energy declined noticeably. I became his primary caregiver, attending every doctor's appointment, managing his medications, and adjusting our lifestyle to accommodate his diminishing strength. While I focused on Gerald's health, the dynamics at Maxwell Real Estate shifted. Board meetings that once happened at our dining table moved to the downtown office. Decisions that Gerald and I would have discussed over dinner were made in conference rooms I wasn't invited to attend. The boys began treating the company as if it were already theirs, while Gerald was still very much alive and technically in charge. During this transition, Gerald would often squeeze my hand when we were alone and whisper, "Don't worry, Lula. I've made sure you'll always be taken care of. Everything we built together." I believed him completely. After all, we had been partners in everything for 35 years. But looking back, I should have seen the warning signs of what was coming. The way James would cut me off when I asked about financial reports, how Thomas would avoid eye contact when I mentioned future projects, the subtle way Andrea and Sophia would exchange glances when I offered input at family dinners. They were already erasing me long before Gerald took his last breath. The first time I truly felt like an outsider in my own family was during Christmas dinner 3 years ago. Gerald was having a good day, his color better than it had been in weeks. We had our traditional feast, laid out the tree, glittering with ornaments, collected over decades of family memories. James clinked his glass for attention and announced that Maxwell Real Estate had just secured the Riverside development, a $50 million project that would transform an abandoned industrial area into luxury condominiums and retail space. Everyone erupted in congratulations, while Gerald beamed with pride. "When did this happen?" I asked, genuinely surprised, as this was the first I was hearing about it. "We've been working on it for months, Mom," James said dismissively. "It's been all-consuming." "I handle the books," I said. "I haven't seen any of the preliminary costs or contracts." Thomas looked uncomfortable. "James has restructured the accounting department. We have a whole team for that now." "We're modernizing," Andrea added with a thin smile. "The company's too big for kitchen table bookkeeping now." I felt Gerald's hand cover mine under the table, a silent acknowledgement of my hurt feelings. Later that night, he apologized. "The boys are just eager to prove themselves. They don't mean to sideline you." But they did, and it only got worse. The following spring, I discovered my office access code no longer worked. When I called Thomas about it, he sounded surprised. "Oh, it must have reset the system during the upgrade. I'll have someone fix it." No one ever did. When summer came, I noticed financial documents missing from Gerald's home office. Important files containing property deeds, partnership agreements, and tax documents that I had organized meticulously for decades were simply gone. When I mentioned it to Gerald, he looked troubled. "I'll talk to James about it," he promised. "They've probably just moved them to the secure storage at the main office." But something in his eyes told me he wasn't convinced. That night, I heard him on the phone, his voice uncharacteristically stern, as he spoke with our eldest son. "She built this company with me, James. Your mother deserves your respect, not your secrecy." The next day, James came by with a stack of folders, claiming they had been digitizing records and apologizing for not keeping me in the loop. His smile never reached his eyes. I began noticing other changes too. Meetings scheduled when Gerald was having his treatments, so I would be unavailable. Property tours conducted while I was managing Gerald's appointments with specialists. Gradually, deliberately, I was being maneuvered out of the picture. Then came the evening that confirmed my worst fears. Gerald had gone to bed early, exhausted, from a new medication adjustment. I was in the kitchen making tea when I heard James and Thomas come in through the side door, not realizing I was still awake. "Dad's getting worse," James was saying. "We need to accelerate the restructuring before it's too late." "What about Mom?" Thomas asked, his voice hesitant. "What about her?" "She's not on any of the corporate documents. We'll make sure she has a comfortable retirement allowance, but the company needs professional leadership now, not sentimental attachment." I froze, teacup halfway to my lips, as my own son dismissed my 30 years of work as sentimental attachment. "Dad won't like it," Thomas said. "Dad's not thinking clearly these days," James replied coldly. "He's emotional and nostalgic. We need to protect his legacy by making smart business decisions, and that means transitioning Mom out completely." I set my cup down silently and slipped upstairs, my heart pounding. That night, I lay awake beside Gerald, watching his labored breathing and wondering how my children could have become such strangers. The next morning, I told Gerald what I had overheard. His face darkened with a fury I had rarely seen. "This ends now," he said firmly, reaching for his phone. "I'm calling Franklin." Franklin Davis had been Gerald's attorney and friend for 30 years. They had met in college and remained close, even as their paths diverged professionally. Franklin had handled all our legal matters, from the company formation to our personal estate planning. He was the one person outside the family that Gerald trusted implicitly. 2 days later, while the boys were at the office, Franklin came to our home. Gerald was having a difficult day. His breathing labored even with the oxygen support, but his mind was clear and determined. "Franklin, I need to make some changes," Gerald said after I helped him into his study. "And I need them done quietly and quickly." For the next 3 hours, the men talked while I brought them refreshments and paperwork from our files. Occasionally, Gerald would call me in to confirm details or ask my opinion on specific matters. By the end of the meeting, Franklin was taking notes and nodding soberly. "I'll have these documents prepared by tomorrow," he promised. "Once they're signed and notarized, I'll handle the filings personally." As he was leaving, Franklin pulled me aside at the door. "Lula Gerald asked me to prepare something for you as well. A folder with copies of everything, plus some additional documentation. Keep it somewhere safe, and don't mention it to anyone." The grave look in his eyes made my stomach tighten. "Is something wrong, Franklin?" He squeezed my arm gently. "Let's just say Gerald wants to make absolutely certain that his wishes are respected. All of them." The folder arrived by courier the following week, sealed with Franklin's law firm stamp. Gerald instructed me to place it in our safety deposit box without opening it. "It's insurance, Lula," he said. "Just in case, those would be some of the last coherent conversations we would have." 3 weeks later, Gerald's condition deteriorated rapidly. He developed pneumonia, and his already compromised heart couldn't cope with the additional strain. I spent every moment by his side, in the hospital, holding his hand, reminiscing about our life together, and telling him how much I loved him. James and Thomas visited sporadically, always seeming more concerned with phone calls and business matters than with their dying father. When I called to tell them, the doctor said Gerald had taken a turn for the worse. They arrived an hour later, after finishing a meeting. Gerald passed away just before dawn on a Tuesday morning. I was holding his hand, telling him about the day we met, when he simply stopped breathing. The room felt instantly emptier, as if all the light had been pulled out of it, along with his final breath. The boys arrived 20 minutes later, after it was already over. Their expressions were appropriately somber, but there were no tears. James immediately began making phone calls about funeral arrangements, while Thomas awkwardly patted my shoulder. Neither seemed to understand that a piece of my soul had just died. The next few days passed in a blur of funeral preparations, condolence calls, and paperwork. The boys took control of everything, consulting me only on the most superficial details. The services would be at Metropolitan Chapel. Would I prefer lilies or roses for the arrangements? Should Gerald's navy or charcoal suit be selected for burial? Meanwhile, they were already boxing up his personal items from the office, changing the locks on the company doors, and requesting his passwords and access codes to ensure business continuity. Through my grief, I began to realize they were methodically erasing their father's presence, while simultaneously pushing me further to the margins. When I went to collect Gerald's personal items from his desk, James informed me it had already been cleared out with important business documents secured and personal effects set aside. The personal effects turned out to be a single box containing Gerald's college diploma, a few family photos, and his collection of vintage fountain pens. 30 years of his professional life reduced to a cardboard box that wouldn't even have filled the trunk of my car. I was still reeling from this when the formal invitation arrived 5 days after the funeral. It was on heavy cream stationery with the letterhead of Harold Jenkins, attorney at law, a name I didn't recognize. The letter requested my presence at the formal reading of the last will and testament of Gerald Edward Maxwell, scheduled for the following Monday at 10 o'clock. Confused, I called Franklin Davis immediately, only to reach his voicemail stating he was on an extended vacation and unavailable. I tried his cell phone, his home, and even his secretary, all without success. Franklin had simply vanished. When I mentioned the will reading to James that evening, his expression flickered briefly before smoothing into practiced sympathy. Yes, we've engaged Harold Jenkins to handle Dad's estate. Franklin recommended him before leaving town. That was a lie. Gerald would never have trusted our affairs to anyone but Franklin. But before I could press further, James continued. It's just a formality, Mom. Everything's being handled according to Dad's wishes. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. That night, I retrieved the sealed folder from our safety deposit box. Whatever insurance Gerald had arranged, it seemed the time had come to understand it. The contents shocked me to my core. The morning of the will reading dawned bright and clear, a beautiful October day that Gerald would have appreciated. I dressed carefully in a tailored navy suit he had always loved, applied minimal makeup to conceal my exhaustion, and placed the contents of Franklin's folder in my leather portfolio. The law offices of Harold Jenkins occupied the 15th floor of a glass tower downtown, all chrome and leather, with abstract art and city views designed to impress clients and intimidate opponents. I arrived 10 minutes early, my heart pounding, but my resolve firm. The receptionist directed me to a conference room at the end of the hall. As I approached, I could hear voices inside, including my sons and their wives. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and opened the door. The conversation stopped abruptly. 8 pairs of eyes turned toward me. James and Thomas stood side by side, blocking the entrance to the room. Behind them sat their wives, along with Harold Jenkins, and 3 men I recognized as Gerald's business associates. "Mom," James said coolly, making no move to let me pass. "There's been a miscommunication. You didn't need to come today." I blinked, momentarily confused. The letter specifically requested my presence for the reading of Gerald's will. Thomas, at least, had the decency to look uncomfortable, his eyes darting away from mine. James, however, stood firm. "You're not mentioned here," he said, his voice flat. "This is just for beneficiaries." I felt as though I'd been slapped. 35 years of marriage, of partnership, of building a life and business together. And I wasn't even mentioned in my husband's will. From behind the boys, I heard Andrea whisper something to Sophia, followed by a muffled laugh. Harold Jenkins, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, shifted awkwardly in his chair, but said nothing to contradict my son. In that moment, something crystallized within me. All the small slights, the gradual exclusions, the whispered conversations, when they thought I couldn't hear, coalesced into perfect clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding or an oversight. This was the culmination of a calculated plan to erase me from the business, and by extension, from Gerald's legacy. I looked my firstborn son directly in the eyes and saw nothing of the little boy I had raised, nothing of his father's integrity. All I saw was cold ambition. "I see," I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. I set my portfolio on the small table beside the door and opened it deliberately. "Then perhaps you can explain these documents." I removed the first paper from Franklin's folder, a notarized original of Gerald's will, dated just 1 month before his death, and held it up for all to see. "This appears to be my husband's most recent will, signed and witnessed in the presence of Franklin Davis, his attorney of 30 years. I turned to Harold Jenkins. Strangely, it names me as both executor and primary beneficiary. "Would you care to explain the discrepancy, Mr. Jenkins?" The room went absolutely silent. Harold Jenkins paled visibly, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. "I have no knowledge of that document," he finally stammered. "The will provided to me was executed 3 years ago and names James Maxwell as executor." "How interesting," I replied, my voice deceptively calm as I removed a second document. "Because I also have here the transfer of ownership papers showing that Gerald restructured the company 3 months ago, placing 51% of all shares in my name. These papers were properly filed with the State Business Registry. Would you like to see the receipt?" James lunged forward, attempting to snatch the papers from my hand. I stepped back, my heart pounding, but my grip firm. "Don't embarrass yourself further, James," I said, my voice hardening. "There are witnesses." "You manipulated him when he was sick," James hissed, his handsome face contorted with rage. "You took advantage of his weakened state to steal what should rightfully belong to his sons." "Is that what you told yourself when you changed the locks at the office?" I countered. "When you removed files from our home, when you hired a new attorney without consultation, after Franklin mysteriously went on vacation." I turned to Harold Jenkins, whose professional demeanor was rapidly crumbling. "Speaking of Franklin, he left me something else." I removed a sealed envelope from the folder. A letter explaining how my son threatened him with a malpractice suit if he didn't disappear until after Gerald's will was settled. Shall I read it aloud, or would you prefer to view it privately with the State Bar Association? Jenkins' face went from pale to gray. One of Gerald's business associates, Martin Thompson, rose to his feet. "What the hell is going on here, James?" he demanded. "You told us this meeting was to formalize what we already knew, that Gerald had left the business to you and Thomas, with appropriate provisions for your mother." I smiled thinly. "Oh, there are provisions for me, Martin. They just aren't what my sons expected." I removed a USB drive from the folder. "This contains recorded conversations between Gerald and Franklin, discussing his wishes and the reasons behind them, including his concerns about financial irregularities he had discovered. This revelation hit like a bombshell. Thomas finally spoke, his voice uncertain. What financial irregularities? I looked at my younger son, seeing confusion rather than deceit in his eyes. Perhaps you should ask your brother about the Riverside Development Funding and where $3 million of the initial investment actually went. All eyes turned to James, whose composure was visibly cracking. Andrea stood up, her voice sharp. This is ridiculous. Gerald was confused near the end. These documents won't hold up in court. That's why the final item in my folder is this, I said, pulling out a thick, bound report. A forensic accounting analysis of company transactions over the past 2 years, showing systematic diversion of funds to a shell corporation registered in Andrea's maiden name. Gerald commissioned it when he began suspecting something was wrong. The room erupted into chaos. James shouted accusations while Andrea frantically whispered in his ear. Thomas stood frozen, looking between his brother and me with growing horror. The business associates conferred urgently with each other. Through it all, Harold Jenkins seemed to be shrinking in his chair, likely calculating how much this debacle would cost his professional reputation. I walked calmly to the head of the conference table, set down all the documents, and took the seat that should have been mine from the beginning. Now, I said, cutting through the noise, I believe we were here to read my husband's will, his actual will. Shall we proceed? The reading of the actual will was anticlimactic after the dramatic confrontation. Gerald had indeed left the majority of his personal assets and 51% of the company shares to me. The remaining 49% was split between James and Thomas, with the explicit condition that their ownership was contingent upon my approval of their involvement in company operations. Most surprising to everyone except me was a clause stating that if either son contested the will or was found to have engaged in financial impropriety, their shares would be forfeited and redistributed to the remaining beneficiaries. Gerald had known exactly what he was doing. As the meeting broke up, people filed out in stunned silence. James stormed out without a word, Andrea trailing behind him, her usual poise shattered. Harold Jenkins made a hasty exit, muttering about reviewing his files. The business associates each shook my hand, offering awkward condolences, both for my loss and for the uncomfortable scene they had witnessed. Thomas lingered, his expression a mix of shame and confusion. When we were alone, he approached hesitantly. "Mom, I swear I didn't know what James was doing," he said, his voice breaking. "He told me you were taking advantage of Dad, making decisions while he was medicated that would hurt the company. I believed him." I studied my younger son's face, seeing genuine remorse. Why would you believe I would hurt something Gerald and I built together? Something that was meant to be your inheritance too. Thomas looked down. James said your judgment was clouded by grief, that you were making emotional decisions. He had spreadsheets, projections, showing the company would collapse under your management. He met my eyes. I was wrong to trust him over you. I'm so sorry. Trust is easily broken and slowly rebuilt, Thomas, I said finally. I want to believe you weren't part of this scheme, but I need time and evidence. He nodded, understanding the boundaries I was setting. What happens now? Now I meet with Franklin, who should be returning from his vacation today. We'll conduct a complete audit of the company finances and operations. After that, we'll see where we stand. Thomas hesitated at the door. And James, I felt the weight of maternal love warring with the need for justice. That depends on what the audit reveals and on James himself. Some betrayals can't be overlooked, even between mother and son. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Franklin Davis returned full of apologies and righteous indignation at how he had been manipulated. Together, we initiated a comprehensive review of the company's finances and operations. The results confirmed my worst fears. Over the past 2 years, James had systematically diverted company funds into personal accounts, falsified documents, and misrepresented the financial health of several projects. The Riverside development, in particular, had been used as a vehicle to funnel money into a separate corporation owned jointly by James and Andrea. Thomas, it seemed, had been kept in the dark about the specifics, though his willingness to accept James' leadership without question had enabled the fraud to continue unchecked. As the evidence mounted, I faced the painful decision of how to proceed. Legally, the path was clear. James had committed fraud, embezzlement, and potentially tax evasion. Criminal charges could and perhaps should be filed. But this was my son, my firstborn. Despite everything, I struggled with the thought of seeing him in handcuffs, of visiting him in prison. Franklin advised caution. The evidence isn't going anywhere, Lula. Take time to consider all angles before making decisions you can't undo. I took his advice, focusing first on stabilizing the company. I assumed the role of a CEO, much to the surprise of many employees who had only ever seen me as Gerald's wife. Some were skeptical, others openly hostile, having aligned themselves with James over the years. But a significant number welcomed me, particularly those who had worked with Gerald from the beginning and remembered my early involvement. Thomas asked to remain with the company, offering to work under whatever restrictions I deemed necessary to prove his commitment and loyalty. After careful consideration, I created a new position for him, heading a division focused on sustainable development, an area he was passionate about, but that James had dismissed as unprofitable. His role came with strict oversight and limited financial authority until trust could be rebuilt. As for James, the reckoning came in stages. First, I removed him from all company positions and revoked his access to accounts, properties, and information. When confronted with the evidence of his misdeeds, he initially blustered and threatened, claiming I was destroying the family legacy. "You're the one who betrayed the legacy," I told him during our final confrontation in what had once been Gerald's office. "Your father built this company on integrity and hard work. You tried to steal it through lies and manipulation. I built it into what it is today," he countered. "Dad was stuck in the past, and you're even worse. You have no vision for the future." "What I have is evidence of your crimes," I replied calmly. "Right now, you have 2 choices: make full restitution of the embezzled funds and step away completely, or face criminal charges." James scoffed. "You wouldn't send your own son to prison." I looked at him steadily. "Try me." In the end, faced with overwhelming evidence and the desertion of his allies, James agreed to return the misappropriated funds and resign from the company. The agreement included a non-disclosure clause, preventing him from discussing company matters, and a non-compete, preventing him from working in real estate development within the state for 5 years. It was a bitter pill for him to swallow, but far less than he deserved. As he signed the papers, he didn't meet my eyes once. When it was done, he stood to leave, pausing at the door. "He would have given it to me eventually," James said, his voice hard, "if he had lived long enough to see what I could do with it." "No," I replied softly. Your father valued integrity above profit. He would have given you the chance to earn leadership, but he would never have rewarded deception. James left without another word. Andrea filed for divorce 3 months later, once it became clear that there would be no financial windfall or corporate position in her future. Thomas's path was different. He worked diligently to regain my trust, accepting oversight without complaint and bringing fresh ideas to the Sustainable Development Division. His wife, Sophia, unlike Andrea, reached out to me personally, inviting me to lunch and later to their home, making genuine efforts to repair the relationship that had fractured. Over time, the company stabilized and then began to thrive under new leadership. I discovered that my years of quiet observation and behind-the-scenes work had given me insights and skills I hadn't recognized in myself. Projects that James had dismissed as too conservative began showing steady returns, while the sustainable initiatives Thomas championed attracted a new class of environmentally conscious investors. Franklin Davis, restored to his position as company counsel, became my trusted advisor and friend. Gerald would be proud, he told me 6 months after the will reading. Not just of how you handled the business, but of how you handled yourself through all of this. The compliment meant more than he could know. There were still nights when I lay awake, wondering where I had gone wrong with James, questioning if there had been signs I missed, or moments when a different word or action might have changed his path. The grief of losing a child to their own choices is different from losing them to death, but no less profound. But there were good days too, days when a project came together perfectly, when Thomas and I collaborated successfully, when I could feel Gerald's vision continuing through my stewardship. On those days, I could almost hear his infectious laugh, could almost feel his hand squeezing mine in support. 6 months after that fateful will reading, I stood on the rooftop garden of our newest completed project, a mixed-use development that included affordable housing units alongside luxury condominiums. It had been Gerald's concept, originally, a way to give back to the community while still creating profitable real estate. James had tried to eliminate the affordable housing component. I had restored it and expanded it. The garden featured a small plaque dedicating the space to Gerald's memory. As evening fell and the city lights began to twinkle around us, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed, both professionally and personally. Professionally, Maxwell Real Estate had emerged stronger from the crisis. The initial shock and gossip about James's departure had faded, replaced by industry respect for the company's new direction under my leadership. The sustainable initiatives Thomas championed were winning awards and attracting positive press. Employees who had initially doubted my ability now sought my input and guidance. Personally, the journey had been more complex. The relationship with Thomas was healing slowly but steadily. He and Sophia had just announced they were expecting their first child, and the joy of becoming a grandmother was a bright spot in a difficult year. They had asked if I would help them choose a name if the baby was a boy, a gesture of inclusion that meant more than they could know. James remained distant, our only communications happening through attorneys. I had heard he moved to the West Coast and started a small investment firm. Sometimes I would pick up the phone to call him, only to set it down again, unsure what I would say, or if he would even answer. The door wasn't closed, but the path back would need to begin with him. The hardest adjustment had been learning to live without Gerald. After 35 years of partnership, his absence left a void that no amount of business success could fill. I missed his counsel, his laughter, his steadying presence during difficult moments. There were still mornings when I woke, expecting to find him beside me, evenings when I caught myself setting two places for dinner. But gradually, I was finding my way forward. I had reconnected with former teaching colleagues, some of whom had become principals and education administrators. We established a scholarship fund in Gerald's name for underprivileged students interested in business or architecture, creating a legacy that honored his belief in giving everyone a fair chance. I had also discovered unexpected joy in my new role. Leading the company that Gerald and I had built from nothing gave me purpose and challenged me daily. At 57, I was embarking on a second career that incorporated all the skills I had developed over decades of supporting others. It turned out I had a talent for leadership that had previously gone unrecognized, even by myself. As the sun set completely and stars began appearing overhead, I thought about the folder that had changed everything. Gerald's foresight and Franklin's loyalty had given me the tools to fight for what was rightfully mine. But the strength to use those tools had come from within. I had never imagined finding myself in a position where I would have to stand against my own children to protect my husband's legacy and my own future. That painful necessity had forced me to discover capabilities I never knew I possessed, to find a resilience that surprised even myself. The greatest lesson from this painful chapter was realizing that we never truly know our own strength until circumstances demand we find it. Sometimes, the hardest challenges reveal our deepest capacities, and sometimes, when one chapter ends far too painfully, another begins with unexpected possibilities. As I prepared to leave the garden, my phone chimed with a text from Thomas, asking if I was available for breakfast the next morning to discuss a new project idea. I smiled as I typed a response, grateful for this small rebuilding of trust, this tentative new beginning. The folder had given me the leverage I needed in that critical moment when my sons blocked my path. But the true power had been in me all along, waiting for the moment when I would need to claim it. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself when it felt like everyone was against you? Leave a comment below and share your story. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength in difficult moments. Remember, sometimes the greatest revelations about ourselves come in our hardest seasons. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the courage to stand firm when life tests your resolve.